I must, Donald, if I just can just say something about Rob,
Sure.
and that is that I personally believe that he's. I think he's clean. I think he's a real ideologue. I think he's in his heart. You are a real communist, Rob. I really believe so, and I think you're a good person. People like you. But I think there's something that you're missing out. You and people like, for example, Pravin Gordhan, you're missing something out. You really want this idea of communism to work. You've got a theoretical background. You really believe in communism, and you want to implement that. You're trying to put all sort of things in place in order for this system to be implemented and for the betterment of all South Africans. I really believe that is what you believe. Unfortunately, the reality is that there are few real ideologues like you in the government and in the tripartite alliance. The ANC government today, the ANC and COSATU and the Communist Party today, it's basically one massive patronage. They're simply living off the state. And I can't believe how people like you that really, and I believe you really want to implement certain policies for the good of all South Africans. But every time it doesn't work. And it doesn't work for two reasons. The one is it can't work because this thing called communism is intellectually simply unconvincing. It is philosophically weak. It's empirically been proven to be wanting. That's the one thing. But more importantly is that the ANC government today simply exists because they want to live off the state. Your colleagues in the ANC, most of them, simply do not believe in your ideology. They go along for the ride, they use the terminology, and they use the rhetoric because that puts them in a powerful position to keep on living off the state. But they're not ideologically aligned really with you. And I think that's where you and people like Pravin Gordhan are making a huge mistake. Unfortunately, well, we've come to the end of the line now. The South African economy is so deep in trouble. The state-owned enterprises have been destroyed financially and operationally. The fiscal accounts is totally and completely unsustainable. And everything, just about everything the ANC touches is a disaster. And I can go through the list, everything. Education is of the worst in the world. Health services, I don't even have to tell you what is going on. We can all see that at the moment. The police service has collapsed for all practical purposes. The local authorities are a disaster, all of them. And I'm afraid to say it is because of the ideology of communism, but more importantly, it's simply because of the incompetence of a huge patronage system under the leadership of the ANC.
Well, I don't really want to get into a big debate about, where the extent of corruption and whether there's just a handful of people who are not. I think that there are, for example, the president now is leading a massive cleanup campaign and is fighting some very, very tough political battles. And he's got the full support of the South African Communist Party and COSATU in that. But I would just simply say that I don't think that patronage, corruption, and so on is linked to a communist ideology. And it's not that the ANC has accepted that either. The ANC is a national liberation movement and is a much broader church than the SACP. But you have to look at a place like the Zaire under Mobutu, where they had an outright capitalist ideology, but where the looting was on a scale which I think makes ours look a little bit modest by comparison. So yeah. I don't think that you can relate state capture and corruption. I think they were a deviation from the national democratic policies that the ANC stood for. A big deviation, a serious deviation, and one that is costing us dearly in terms of the capacity we need to move further forward. But I think that really what I want to say is that I think that saying things like, drawing examples from, if you want, North Korea or the Soviet Union and all of that, and saying this is the essence of socialism, is a little bit like saying that capitalism, which grew up at the time of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, is inextricably linked with child labor and whatever. And I think that, of course, capitalism developed in a certain way, and then it went through different iterations and became a somewhat different animal later on. But nonetheless, I think is still the driving of economic activity by the putting of profit above people in too many instances is creating a world which is dangerously unable to confront the huge challenges that lie ahead in any kind of inclusive manner, and which could threaten to divide the world up into enclave communities and the rest of the world, and would be a recipe for huge disasters in the future. And I think that the socialist alternative is something that we will be starting to learn as we move along. I'm not holding out as a an example of everything that we should all be just copying China. But I do think that China has shown that a developmental state with the right disciplines attached to it and with, very serious anti-corruption elements built in. So if you want to say corruption is linked to communism, well, what about that? That they have succeeded in developing their country so that it is now becoming in a few years' time, it'll be the largest economy in the world. And a country like Cuba, which has not succeeded in doing that, has nonetheless succeeded in developing a world-class health system with vaccine capacity that, 99% of the vaccines in Africa are imported. Cuba produces vaccines that are even consumed in the United States, and also an education system. So I think that there are examples of where the profit motive has been subordinated to a developmental or a social imperative, where there have been good results for the benefit of the people. And I think these are the stepping stones that we will be building on as we move further forward. If we allow the world to be dominated by profits, pursuit of profit in the years that lie ahead, I don't think that we're going to find a future that the majority of working people and the poor are going to benefit from. On the other hand, we start to have a social direction that progressively and incrementally moves us in that direction. I think that's the only way that humanity as a whole can benefit.
Yeah, I must say that much of what you just said, I actually agree with. It doesn't necessarily mean if you're communist that you're corrupt, but with a bigger state, chances are that there's going to be more corruption. But, you referred to Cuba a couple of times now, and we can debate all the ideologies and all that, but the reality is that nobody is fleeing to Cuba, and a lot of Cubans are fleeing to the United States. That is the reality. And the reality for the man on the street is that an economist system and a highly centralized system, like, for example, in Cuba, is that freedoms like individual freedoms, the right of movement, the right to owning property, the right of doing your own thing, and the right to run a successful business, that is to a large extent limited. And that's why people are trying to get out of Cuba, not kind of fleeing back into Cuba.
Yeah, but you see, one of the things I've heard this saying, which I think sums it all up. Cuba's a good place to be if you're poor, not such a good place to be if you want to be rich.
That's very untrue. That's very untrue, Rob.
And I think that many of the people that are leaving are people who, if you were paying the kind of salaries that you're paying people in the West Havana medical institutions that are there, high class, world class, if you paid them the same salaries you paid in the United States, you wouldn't have it in Cuba. It's just impossible. And those people, those kind of people, are able to earn much more if they ended up in the United States. And I think that the kind of people that are leaving are not the poor people who generally have done better off as a result of the social system in Cuba.
That's very untrue.
Is that they remain a developing country. That is their problem. I mean, they're a very small country, a very small island. They were linked up to Comecon, and when that disappeared, and the sanctions and the embargo they've been under have had tremendous negative effects on Cuba. Nonetheless, they have made great strides forward. There are 41 places in the development index.
Yeah, that's very untrue about being poor. It's good to be in Cuba, for example, if you're poor. That's completely untrue. I mean, all the statistics point to the fact that if you want to be poor, it's better to be poor in a rich country than to be poor in a poor country, like, for example, in Cuba.
Well, I recall some years ago, Robert McNamara, who became the head of the World Bank, just before 1994, he said he was having a recant on all of the programs and policies he'd been part of, the Vietnam War and everything. And he said at a meeting in South Africa, he said that there are poor people in Washington, D.C. who are worse off than people in Cuba. he'd been there and he'd looked there and he'd done the research. So I think that, that is the situation. I don't think it's great to be a homeless, poor person in many parts of the United States. There you are. At least in Cuba, you'll get shelter and education and opportunities.